The city is on fire, but not all of it. Just the parts where people like you live. You can smell it before you see it. Smoke, and something worse underneath the smoke. You have lived here your whole life. Your father lived here, his father built something here, and now a man on a horse is riding past your door. He is not Roman. He does not slow down. You do not run. There is nowhere to run to. The city was the plan. The city was always the plan. And the city is ending tonight. History calls this the fall of the Western Roman Empire. 476 AD. One date. One clean line. But that is not what this was. This was a system. And it was designed specifically for people like you. Here is what that system actually was. Rome did not collapse in a night. It collapsed over decades. Slowly enough that nobody sounded the alarm in time. And fast enough that when it finally fell, you had no time to prepare. The system was called citizenship. You were told citizenship protected you. You were told the legions protected you. You were told the walls protected you. But here is the part they never teach. The walls had not been properly maintained in 40 years. The legions were mostly hired foreigners who had no loyalty to you. And citizenship meant nothing when the money ran out. And the money had run out. You just did not know it yet. You were not rich, but you were not at the bottom either. You had a trade. Maybe a small shop near the forum. Maybe you worked the grain stores. Maybe you made things from metal or cloth. The city had always needed people like you. You paid your taxes. You followed the rules. You believed in the idea of Rome even when Rome gave you very little back. And there was something real about that belief. Walking the same streets that senators walked. Drinking from the same aqueducts that fed the palace. That was worth something. You thought it was worth something. Your children played in the forums. Your wife bought grain at the same markets that had been open for 300 years. The festivals still happened. The games still ran. Everything looked exactly like it always had. But the design was deliberate. A look of stability was maintained because stability was what kept you compliant. A panicked population asks questions. A satisfied population pays taxes and stays where it is. And that is what the system needed you to do. Stay where you were. Keep producing. Keep believing. Right up until the moment the belief became useless. That moment was coming. And nobody told you. The trap had 3 layers. The first layer was the tax system. By the 4th century, Roman taxes had become something different. They were not a contribution to the empire. They were extraction. The government needed money for the army. The army was the only thing holding the borders. So the taxes rose. Then they rose again. Then they rose again after that. And the people who could pay them were taxed until they could not pay anymore. And the people who could not pay were taxed anyway. If you could not pay, your land was taken. If your land was taken, you became a tenant on the land you once owned. A tenant with no rights and no exit. The second layer was the currency. The silver coin you earned in 200 AD was mostly silver. The silver coin in 300 AD was barely 2% silver. The government had been quietly draining the metal from the coins for decades. Your wages looked the same, but they bought less every year. And the tax collectors demanded the old amounts in the new coins, which meant they were taking more, which meant you had less. Every single year. And here is where it gets worse. The third layer had not even activated yet. The third layer was the army. Not the danger of the army, the absence of it. Rome's military had been built on Roman citizens, men who fought because this was their land and their city. By the 5th century that was gone. The empire was paying foreign fighters to guard its borders. Visigoths. Huns. Ostrogoths. They were not bad soldiers, but they were not fighting for you. They were fighting for the contract. And when the contract stopped paying, the contract ended. And some of those soldiers turned around and came the other direction. This was not an accident. The empire had depended on foreign soldiers because Roman citizens had stopped volunteering. Roman citizens had stopped volunteering because the army no longer paid enough. The army no longer paid enough because the treasury was empty. The treasury was empty because the tax base had collapsed. The tax base had collapsed because the taxes had been too high for too long. Every layer connected to every other layer. Every failure fed the next failure. And you, in your shop near the forum, were standing in the middle of it. with no idea how far down the collapse actually went. You could see the exit, but the exit was part of the trap. People talked about leaving. Everyone talked about leaving, heading east to Constantinople. The Eastern Empire was still standing. The Eastern Empire still had a functioning treasury and a real army. You heard stories of people who had gone east and built new lives. You believed those stories because you needed to believe them. But the journey east cost money you did not have, and the roads were no longer safe. And the Eastern Empire was not accepting waves of Western refugees. The door was open just enough to see the light through it, not open enough to walk through. In the meantime, daily life had its small indignities. The bread was worse. The grain dole had been cut. The aqueduct in your district had stopped working 2 years ago. Nobody came to fix it. The officials who used to come to the market were no longer visible. The games still ran, but they were smaller. Fewer animals. Fewer fighters. A show of normalcy getting harder to maintain. And every week the prices in the market went up. And every week your coins bought a little less. And every week you told yourself it would stabilize. Because what else do you tell yourself? If you had been living in Rome in 475 AD and you saw everything clearly, would you have left with nothing and taken your chances on the road, or stayed inside the walls and hoped? Think before you answer. Most people choose the option that kills them. The system needed you to stay. A city without residents is not a city. A city without residents produces no tax revenue. A city without residents cannot justify a military garrison. So the system created reasons to stay. The grain dole was one. Even a reduced grain dole was better than nothing on the road. The walls were another. Even deteriorating walls felt safer than open countryside with raiders moving through it. The network was another. Your customers were here. Your suppliers were here. Your family was here. Leaving meant leaving all of it. And leaving was not something an ordinary Roman had ever had to practice. Romans stayed. The city always provided. That was the belief built into 300 years of Roman identity. And now that identity was the thing keeping you inside a collapsing structure. They didn't just trap you. They made you trap yourself. The empire had spent centuries teaching you that the city was safety, and now the city was the danger. But the lesson was too deep to unlearn in time. History called it loyalty. It was not loyalty. It was dependency so deep it looked like a choice. Here is what nobody told you then. And here is what history glosses over now. The people at the top of the Roman system knew. Not all of them, but enough of them. The emperors of the 4th and 5th centuries were not incompetent men who stumbled into collapse. Several of them were highly intelligent administrators who understood exactly what was happening. They moved the capital. Constantine moved east to Constantinople in 330 AD, not because Constantinople was better, because the West was already showing the early signs of structural failure, and the East was the part worth saving. They knew, and nobody told the ordinary Roman citizen in the street. The design was deliberate. A slow announcement of collapse would have caused panic. Panic would have triggered mass emigration. Mass emigration would have collapsed the tax base faster. So the information was controlled. The festivals ran. The ceremonies continued. The officials maintained the language of stability. And the system kept extracting value from the western provinces right up until there was no more value to extract. You were not a citizen being protected. You were a resource being managed. And the managers had already moved on. And here is the part that makes it worse. But before we continue, hit the subscribe button. The algorithm hides channel like this one. But your engagement is how we stay alive. If you have subscribed, let's continue revealing the hidden system. The collapse was not the end of a system. It was a system completing itself. The Roman aristocracy did not fall with Rome. Most of them survived. Many of them made arrangements with the incoming powers. They negotiated. They converted. They offered local knowledge and administrative experience to the new rulers. And the new rulers took them up on it. Because ruling a territory you do not understand is hard. And the Roman aristocracy understood the territory. So the people at the top adapted. And the people in the middle and at the bottom were left where they were. History calls this the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But that is not what this was. This was a system. And it was designed specifically for people like you. The system needed citizens to remain productive and compliant right to the final moment. The system needed the idea of Rome to remain believable so that nobody asked the right questions too early. The system extracted maximum value until the vessel was empty. And then the people who ran the system found a new vessel, and the people who were the vessel became something else. Serfs mostly, working the same land for new landlords, under a different name. Think about the last institution you trusted completely, because it told you it was protecting you. Now ask yourself what it was actually extracting. That is the Roman system. And it never really ended. Every exit was blocked. By design, not accident. The road east was blocked by cost and danger. Most ordinary Romans did not have the money to relocate. And the roads that had once been safe enough for trade caravans were now controlled by armed groups with no obligation to let you pass. The rural option was blocked by debt and law. If you owed money to a landowner, you were legally bound to stay within reach. The reform option was blocked by structure. The Roman political system had no mechanism for ordinary citizens to change fiscal policy. You could not vote out the emperor. You could not refuse the tax collector. You could not organize without being treated as a threat to order. Nobody inside the system knew this part. The religious option was complicated. Christianity had been spreading for a century. The church offered community and meaning. But the church could not pay your taxes. And the church could not stop the Visigoths. The military option was gone. By 475 AD, the Western military was not a protection force. It was a collection of competing factions with their own agendas. Joining it meant joining a power struggle you did not understand. Not finding safety. Every exit led back to the same trap. You could see the routes out. You could name them. And one by one you could watch them close. The ceremony looks different now, but the architecture is identical. The currency that quietly loses value while the numbers stay the same. The infrastructure that stops being maintained while the announcements keep announcing it is fine. The sense that the institutions protecting you are still fully functional, because the buildings are still standing. The belief that your identity as a citizen of something means the something will protect you. And the people with resources and information who have already made their arrangements, who already know which way the wind is moving, and who need you to stay productive and compliant while they finish making those arrangements. History called it fate. It wasn't. The Roman system did not collapse because of bad luck. It collapsed because the system had been designed to extract value from the bottom, and eventually the bottom runs out of value. And when it does, the architects of the system call it a tragedy. And they move to Constantinople. And they start again. The question is not whether this pattern repeats. The question is where you are standing when it does. History called it the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But now you know what it actually was. And the system has been waiting 1,000 to 1,500 years for someone to call it by its real name. You just did. Now you are part of the one that remembers. The question is, will you stay awake? Next week we are going inside a system so total that the people trapped inside it were legally prevented from knowing they were trapped. Same era. Different empire. Same architecture. If this one unsettled you, the next one will stay with you.